Today on The State of Us, can we stop aging? Young and old are finding new living arrangements. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, the friendly redneck liberal, senior resident historian, and extraordinaire Lance Jackson. We're looking at today two different items, although related and interestingly juxtaposed. That is both the notion of aging. Could we take a pill to turn back the clock? And this harkens back to an interview that we did right before the pandemic. Actually, I think it released in March of 2020. It's crazy that it's been that long, Lance, but it was with a gentleman whose name is Chip Walter, and he wrote the book Immortality, Inc. He's a National Geographic explorer, and they published the book. So we're going to reference that some today, talk a little bit about where things are at currently with the science of aging. And then we're also going to look at Home Sweet Home for young and old. Communities are set to break ground this year that seek to address loneliness and caregiving shortages in the U.S. So we've got a full docket, but Lance, before we dive in, what is the word of the day?
But the word of the day is not hearken, it's not juxtaposition, even though that's a good one. It is geriatrics, a four-syllable word, geriatrics. It is as a noun in this place. And it is the branch of medicine that deals with the diseases and hygiene of old age. Geriatric, which is an adjective. And one of just the neat things when you pull out your dictionary and look at it, the next word is the word germ. Geriatrics followed by the word germ, which has a big play on one's health.
So let's talk some, Lance, about a pill to turn back the clock.
A pill. That's what I need. I just need another pill.
Yep. Well, you don't have enough.
Give me another pill to take.
You don't have enough. So the article that we're referencing, we're pulling from two different places. So this is the Wall Street Journal. It's linked at thestateofus.org. Then we're also going to be pulling some information from Chip Walter's book, Immortality, Inc. So one of the things that's a pulled out section of the article is roughly 80, the number 80. That's the average lifespan in years for men and women in the U.S. It's a 10% to 20% increase is quite conceivable, according to Stephen Austin of the American Federation for Aging Research. And this is a big industry, right, Lance? I mean, lots of money in trying to cure aging. And I do that with air quotes because the Food and Drug Administration does not actually consider aging to be a disease.
Well, when people get old, they tend to have more money and they want to stick around. So there's money to be made by taking care of old people and keeping them older.
The longer you stick around, though, the more money you need.
Well, that's true.
I do think something that's very important to understand because it illustrates the point well, and this is from Chip Walter's book, is that the likelihood of dying for humans doubles every 8.5 years, which means that by the time you get to 70 or 80, you basically don't have a lot of time left, right? And that's regardless, just to be clear, that chance of doubling, that's regardless of, your general health profile, right? So some people live longer than that, and they may live longer because two things are important. One, they're healthy, and two, they get lucky. Right?
This is a sobering show for me.
Yeah?
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, we need to hurry up. I don't have a lot of time left.
It's going to run out of time.
We better get this show done. I don't know. My every 8.5 years, I got twice as big a chance now.
That's right. So,
I mean, you get 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5. Yes. You get multiple 8.5s. I'm about one more 8.5 year cycle of being gone.
So I have a little more time. And one thing that the book did that I think helps illustrate the importance of that 8.5 number is it basically means that you've set whatever the maximum is that people can live to, which is basically 120, right? And it's very rare. I mean, very rare to find somebody that's it's rare to find somebody that's 100 years old, let alone more than 100 years old, because they've beat the odds. Nature has set for us, right? A clock, and the clock for humans runs out somewhere at about 120. And for most of us, it runs out somewhere right around 80.
One of the first places that we see the word grandparent used was in New England, in the New England colonies, because that was the first time that people began to live long enough to be around when their children had children. So that was one of the first times that the word grandparent had ever been used in the written word, was in the 1700s. So when you think about that, people got married younger and things like that, but, life expectancy was in the 40s. So for John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington to live a long time, they had the correct zip code, right? They had money, they were wealthy, and lived in the right zip code, so they lived longer.
And lucky.
Because
they did. I mean, yes, all of those things are important. But one of the things Chip's book points out, right, is the three components. And they had one of those components, they had an abundance, which was the money and their lifestyle, right? Which does absolutely have an impact. But that, for example, wouldn't have any impact on them getting run over by a horse or shot by, somebody trying to steal something.
But living to be, obviously the medicine wasn't as good back then. But to live into one's 40s was considered ancient in those days, and now, to your point, we see, 70, 80 years old as being not necessarily the norm, but the pinnacle for people. So, doubled in 200 years, who's to say that in another 200, it's not out there, 150, 180 years old.
Well, because people forget that, right? I mean, it's that whole, we know what we know. And we talked about this on a recent episode. We have doubled human life expectancy over the past 115 years. So, yeah, I mean, why is it so crazy? Because if you had told people right at the turn of the 1900s that life expectancy would be 80 today, they probably would have thought you were nuts.
Right.
Whatever,
yep.
Forget it. The average. I mean, it's not that there weren't people living to be that old, because we've had people living to be that old a long time. But the point is that, for it to be expected. So if we've doubled it, in a little over a century, why is it unreasonable to think that we could double it again? I mean, it's possible, well, correction, it may be possible. We think we've figured out how to possibly more than double it. And that all focuses, Lance, around this one concept, and this is what the article is about, which is basically this notion that, and I'm not the scientist here, folks, so I'm boiling it down as simply as I can explain it to you. Your genes, your genetic code, right, and that lives in the cells in your body, when you're born, it's pristine, right? Squeaky clean, brand new, just like we want. Well, and in fact, they talk a little bit about, actually, it's not perfectly squeaky clean when you're born. It peaks at about age 10. That's when everything sort of has arrived at the pristine
and all
age.
Gets operational. Yep.
Right. Everything's up and running. And
and then as you get older, right, some of these cells start to die off.
Yeah.
And the problem is, as they die off, they don't regenerate. And then you start to lose ability. You get achy muscles, you get sore, you become more likely to fall prey to diseases or germs. But what the pill does, right, if I understood it correctly, is that it actually gets rid of some of those dead places in your cells, right? If I understood, I'm a picture person.
Yeah.
So I didn't read it. I just kind of looked at the pictures, and it's like, oh, you take this pill and they get rid of some of your dead connections, which then allow your good ones to start to regenerate again, just like you were older. So, just like when you were younger and you were constantly regenerating, we stop that as we get older. The study of geriatrics shows us that we start to lose that ability to regenerate these cells. But this pill that they're testing and coming up with in lab mice, right, are showing that, well, we'll get rid of some of those dead things, and that gives you more space to create some new ones, which is almost like turning back the clock.
It's a lot like, I think in some ways, a new pair of shoes, right? I mean,
a new pair of shoes.
You go get a new pair of shoes, right? And you're excited. You got your shoes and you put them on and your feet hurt, because it's like, they're not broken in yet, right? I mean, but you got the new shoes. So you think of being born as you got your brand new shoes, right? And they're brand new and that's great, but they're really not at that sweet spot yet. The sweet spot being somewhere between age 10 and age 30 for most humans, in terms of...
Yeah, these shoes are about 3 years old, so I'm getting there.
In terms of physical health, So you've broken them in, but they're still new, right? They look nice. They're clean. They're not ripped or torn. They're not falling apart. They're intact, but they're broken in. And the notion here behind slowing aging, what the companies are working on, Lance, right? Or turning back the clock is basically keeping it in that sweet spot. So that's what it's focused on is there a way to do two things? One, to stop it before you get to that point, hold steady. Or number two, if you're more of Lance's years of wisdom, is there a way to dial it back a little bit? The answer is what we're going to talk about next. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Two options, Lance, two options. If you're more of my position in life, is there a way to just hit pause, right? I want to keep living my life, but don't let me age anymore. I'm where I would like to be. So there's that option. And then there's the other option of, if you're more at Lance's stage of life, could we just dial it back a little bit, right? I mean, you don't want to go back to being 10 years old probably, but you'd like to be out there playing tennis and running around and the world is your oyster, all of that kind of stuff.
That'd be nice.
So the positive news for those wondering how close we are to this, it's sort of a mixed bag because the article points out that there's actually a couple of drug studies underway with drugs that we already have, okay? And these drugs that we already have, one of them is actually related to organ transplant. So that's kind of interesting. It's sort of that story of we have this drug, right? And then we find out that there may be other uses for it. One of the biggest obstacles,
very common,
even though these have been used in people for a long time, is a regulatory hurdle. Because for the FDA to approve it, we would have to accept aging as some sort of illness to be cured or treated at least. And so therein lies a societal question, right? And I think in my mind, we could talk about the science all day, Lance, but I think that's always been the two biggest obstacles. Do we want to go there? And number two, if we do go there, then what? Because it blows up everything about society, right? I mean, if you go from, for example, in Chip's book, they tell us, Lance, right? The chance of dying doubles every 8.5 years. So what if you stopped the chance of dying doubling every 8.5 years? What if you stopped that at age 30? How long would you live? Well, you'd live to be about 700 years old, 695 years old.
What does that do to the study of geriatrics? All of a sudden, we don't need to study it anymore. Y'all living. And I think, your point is this, because most of us are thinking, I don't want to live to be 700 because, Jiminy Christmas, I can't even move now in my 50s and 60s. Well, it's going to be, to your point, what they talk about in the book and in these articles is being 600 or 700 years old and still being able to move like you were 40 or 50.
They call it the health span. It's the number of years in life you have that we consider to be, and I'm using air quotes here because this is a very subjective thing, good years, right? They're the years in life where the number of physical problems you have are minor, right? They're things that are generally easily overcome. There's not a lot of them. They're not very frequent. And when they do happen, they're usually not very severe. And for most people, that's somewhere from right around when they're born all the way until about age 40 or so. And then, 40 to 50, okay-ish. And then from 50 on, things start to really slide downhill from there.
Yeah, things start to really stink. I'll preach to that.
You spend and it accumulates. And I think that's the other thing that the article does a nice job of pointing out, Lance, right, is it's a snowball effect.
Yeah, instead of one thing, all of a sudden you have multiple things wrong.
Right.
Hence why I'm taking a handful of pills every morning so that I can just keep getting up and doing what I do.
Like where maybe when you're 35, one thing goes wrong, you do something to take care of it, you overcome it, and then you move on.
And then you're gone. Yep.
And with a lot of things as you age, obviously it becomes, not going away ever, and other things start to go wrong as well. So then you have that compounding, and in the book Immortality Inc., they call it the whack-a-mole approach to healthcare, right? Oh, there's a new problem. Whack it. Oh, there's a new problem.
When I was your age, I never went to the doctor. I never took a pill. I never got a shot. My life was fine. And now, 35 years later, I got pills. I got this. I got doctor for this. I got a doctor for that. I got a doctor for this. It's ridiculous. I mean, and I'm one of those people that when I was in my 20s and 30s, I didn't go to the doctor. Why did I go to the doctor? There was nothing wrong. I wasn't sore. I didn't hurt. Everything worked. It was all good. And now nothing works and nothing's good. And we just take the medicine to try to keep on going a little bit.
Well, because
I mean that, keep on going a little bit. I can't do what I used to do. My body won't let me.
And that's the question of, I don't want to live 700 years because I don't want to spend that long, in a decrepit kind of state. Well, no, if you were posed the question, you can live 700 years and for 690 of those years, you're going to feel, about like you're 30 years old the whole time. That, I think, changes how a lot of people might answer the question, At the same time, it's so unfathomable, I think, to most of us, because again, from a societal standpoint, think about how everything in our lives, Lance, I mean, truly, almost everything is based around what stage of life we're in. I mean, as a child, right, your focus is on school, on learning new things, on figuring out who you are, what you care about, what you want. In your 20s, you're going through perhaps more education. Again, you're starting to form that professional stage in life of figuring out where you're going to be and what you're going to do. Maybe you're finding somebody to spend your life with. And then as time goes on, you're in that middle stage of working professional career, planning for what comes when you're done with work. And then you're done with work, and then you have, leisure, fun, whatever. And I mean, it's all very built around at this point in life, I'll be at this point, so I will do this thing. And for the most part, that's the mold and model that society follows. So geriatrics has become an understood change in life cycle that we all sort of process. And if you remove not only the component of reaching geriatrics altogether, but then you also extend that cycle, how do you afford to live that long, right? I mean, it throws into question so many things, more than we could ever answer on today's show. The economics of living 700 years is problematic. Because, you think about, Lance, right? You and I have talked about how much money am me as a millennial, going to have to save to be able to afford retirement? Because if I'm living 30 years, 20, 30 years past when I retire, I have to have a lot more money than, say, your parents would have needed for retirement, right? Because, I mean, realistically, if they're retiring at, 55 or 65, but they're only going to live to be 70, you don't have to save as much. But now if I'm going to live to be 85, 90, 95, 100, I have to have a lot more money to live on.
And all of this is just like futuristic, but there are a couple of things that are being done that I think are pretty cool for older folks right now. And it will help extend life a little bit because, and one of them is this magic spoon, and I'm the one calling it the magic spoon. But in the study of geriatrics, we know, and I know from personal experience with my grandmother, and with my dad, one of the reasons why they died, now my grandma was 92. My dad was in his 50s. He had other issues. But both of them, in their last couple of months of being alive, didn't want to eat because nothing tasted good, or there was no taste. And the doctor said one of the reasons why they went downhill so quickly was because they weren't getting the amount of nutrition that they needed. And so now, right, there's this spoon that's being developed that will give people, that will be able to taste things, even, like salt. They can have this taste, which all of a sudden, and, we have people with COVID who have, long-term COVID issues who have lost this sense of taste. But now we have a spoon that will give you that taste when you don't have any. This could extend people's lives because all of a sudden, one of the joys of eating is the tasting of whatever it is you're eating. And if you lose that taste, then you lose the desire slowly to eat. And if you don't eat, then it's hard to get the nutrition that your body needs to continue to function, right?
And this is coming right now.
Right. And this is now.
They say they're expecting it to be commercialized within 5 years. Because people don't think about that. Your ability to taste, again, it's like the other things related to aging that we're talking about, right? It starts to gradually decline as you get older. And to Lance's point of, there are lots of issues with that, because one, you may not eat foods that you need to eat because there's no taste to them, and number two, you may not eat enough of anything to stay healthy because eating is just not enjoyable. And if it's not enjoyable, why would you do it? And this all goes back to that notion of there are things happening right now that are going to make the process of aging not so bad, but ultimately, right, the best option to give people more good years is to prevent them from getting to the bad years in the first place.
Well, that's true. But while we're doing that, it's kind of cool for me to have some things that could extend your life and at the same time, improve your quality of life. Because if you could taste that food, then it's like, well, I'm going to wake up tomorrow because I'm looking forward to breakfast. But if you can't even taste the food that's going to be prepared for you, then you start to lose that desire to live. And I think that's huge. I think that's a huge part of being able to stick around, is wanting to stick around. And anything we can do to perpetuate that feeling, I think it is an important part of helping the aging process.
The other thing I'll mention too, because it's not just taste and smell, right? It's also vision. This is a big one, especially for my father right now, who has macular degeneration. And up until now, there's not really been, it's kind of one of those things, right? Your eye doctor comes to you and it's like, you're just kind of SOL here, right? I can give you some stuff to slow it down, but I cannot fix it and I cannot stop it.
My mom hated that when she would go to the doctor before she passed away, and they would just look at her and say, well, you're old. What do you expect?
Right.
Wait, what kind of answer is that?
Yeah.
You know what's wrong with me. I agree that what you say is wrong with me. And you just look at me and say, well, you're 75 years old. What do you expect? I expect you to be able to do something,
Yep. And this is available right now. It's developed by Iris Vision. And what it is it looks like a VR headset. Okay. You've seen these things before. So here's an area where a VR headset might actually help, in a very practical way. And for patients with things like macular degeneration, what it does is the headset, which you put a smartphone into, actually uses software to beam the images that it's seeing out there in the world into the parts of your eye that are still functioning, that allows your brain to actually form a fully clear image. In other words, it knows, right, on your eye, the parts of it that work, and it uses that to help you actually see everything that's going on. And you can zoom in, zoom out, adjust different image clarity settings that could drastically extend the usable life of your eyes for people with conditions like macular degeneration. So now you got your spoon, Lance, and your headset. You can taste, you can see. Those are big things, right? That quality of life greatly impacts how long you're going to live. If you hate living, the research shows again and again that you are likely to die sooner. If you enjoy life, and it's small things like that aren't small, right? You have to eat every day you eat, and you eat multiple times a day. And if that's not enjoyable, that's wearing. Same thing with your vision, right? I mean, arguably that's even possibly a bigger deal in that if you can't, if you start to lose your vision, you can't see anymore. Are you really going to take time to learn, other options that don't involve sight? Probably not. So I think all of it's tremendous. It's taking place. It'll be interesting to see how it coincides with this whole aging question. But last up, we want to talk about, and we'll do this in the next segment here.
It's the piece I'm most excited about, honestly. I think this is a magical idea.
A new idea that's an old idea to design spaces built for young and old. The care of loved ones, it's expensive. And often putting them someplace else, as Lance and I have, I think, revealed on many episodes. One, it's hard on everybody. Number two, it may not be very safe, right? So what if there was another option? Well, there might be. To find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Communities are seeking to break ground this year that will address loneliness and the caregiving shortage in the United States. How are they going to do that, Lance?
Well, they're talking about creating these social places where they're going to offer things to young people with children, and then those of us who are getting a little bit older and up in years who need some help. And the idea is that you put them all together in the same community. And for somebody who is younger, who maybe can't afford an expensive apartment or house or condo, that they would have their rent offset by helping someone who needed help getting dressed in the morning or getting out their breakfast or whatever. So there would be a trade-off. And plus, we know that as people get older and start to get to this point where I'm entering right now in the study of geriatrics, that we tend to become isolated, that people call us or they check in on us every once in a while, but we spend a lot of time by ourselves, particularly if you're single or your spouse passes away. And that loneliness leads very quickly to deterioration of one's health. And so these communities are just the idea, well, let's bring all of the generations, make it multi-generational community. And then there's something there for everyone. So like, I can't take, I'm starting to struggle to take care of the 2 or 3 acres that I have of property, but I still like to get out and mess around in the flower bed. Well, if this was a community, I could go out and work on the flower beds, but I wouldn't necessarily be in charge of 3 acres. I could just do what I wanted to do and still be enjoying of life. And there's some other things here I like. One of them, they're talking about building it next to a school and preschools. And let's face it, you maybe don't get to see your grandchildren as often as you want, but if you're someone like me who has spent their life around children, that makes me young. And so you put me in a school situation, why couldn't I tutor? Why couldn't I watch recess? Why couldn't I talk to that young person who is, out on the playground, who's just standing out there by themselves, and because nobody wants to talk to them or play with them? That's a perfect person for, and then I feel wanted and needed. You see where retired people are crossing guards or lunchroom attendants. All of these things make you feel younger as you get older. Plus your experience, you're giving that young person who maybe doesn't have too many people in their life who pay attention to them. You as an older person, you dote on them, you pay attention to them. It helps them develop into a better young person, into a better adult. So I really like this idea. The whole concept is really kind of neat. You serve multi-purposes by bringing people together. And then it's kind of like, part of what this show's all about. And that is, how do you get older people to quit saying bad things or negative things about young people? And how do you get young people not to say negative things about old people. Well, hey, if they live together, they're going to find out they got a lot more in common than they do not having things in common. And then all of a sudden, we've solved another whole set of problems. I just really am excited about this whole idea.
In solving other sets of problems, one thing the article points out, and it just was as you were talking about that, Lance, just an item that clicked for me is there's a lot of grandparents right now raising younger children, in
Very
part
true.
because of the drug epidemic, right? So this type of community is beneficial for that, right? But here's the other effect. You're talking about those connections across the ages. If you lived in a place like this where you had more family support, more community support, is it not true that if your support network is better, it's less likely that you would fall into the hands of the drug epidemic in the first place? And even if you start to slip, there may be more people there to catch you, to help you along. And now maybe instead of the grandparents taking over having to raise the children, they help you stay on your feet so that you can keep taking care of them. And they help you raise them instead of becoming the people that have to raise them. Because that is fraught with issues, right? I mean, the whole show's about aging. And as you get older, you have your own problems that need taken care of, right? And at some point, you're not going to be there. It's like that student, that you always tell us about, Lance, when you tell your story about like, grandma's not going to be there forever, right? And that's not, again, not being mean, it's just what is. Like, there are inherent issues to expecting the grandparents to be the primary caregiver for young children.
That's not their role.
Right.
That's not what they're supposed to do. But
if they can supplement.
To your point, that's becoming, I hate to say the norm, because I'm not sure it's the norm, but it sure is happening
more common.
More and more common, even in our small community. And I can't imagine in larger communities, what it is. But
at the youth center, right, there's constant that you find, well, who do you live with? Well, yeah, mom and dad don't live with me. I live with grandma, or I live with grandma and grandpa,
Well, when I taught school at parent teacher conference, again and again, grandparents coming in. Well, I have, the responsibility of the children. Or when I was just in the last 2 years, when I was doing the online school during the onset of COVID, half of the children that I had their main caretaker was the grandparent, because that's who the adult contact was a grandparent. The grandparents didn't want to have to get out and expose themselves to COVID. And this was, before there were vaccines and things. And so it kind of blew my mind to your point of the number of grandparents who are being asked to raise elementary age, middle school age children and high school children. And that's just not it. The energy level is not the same, right? It's one thing to raise them when you're in your 40s. It's another one to be raising them when you're in your 60s and 70s. That's not the way evolution, lifespan, nature expected things to be. There are roles for those of us that are older to help bring children up, but it's not the role as the main caregiver.
Yeah. And I think the whole concept of these communities they're talking about, they call them magic communities, by the way. The whole concept of that is largely based around building really a small town community with more amenities than most small towns often have. So they're planned in that, you're going to have a child care facility. You're going to have an adult day activity center, right? You're going to have things in place that make sure that there is something for everybody, that there are people in charge of making sure there's things to do, so that you're not bored, so that you're not sitting at home, so that you're not alone. And the other interesting thing here, Lance, I just wanted to mention this in closing. The comment in the article about the size of living arrangements. You might think, well, these have to be these huge places where, no, actually the opposite. Well, not the opposite. They're not tiny, but they're very standard size. The difference is the units are connected together. Okay. So you have your own space that's connected with those that you might be, living with or interacting with regularly. But they actually point out that sometimes the larger the space, which again, as you get older, sometimes you buy, right, your larger home or whatever, actually can be detrimental. especially because the space is going to feel more empty the bigger it is, right?
Right. When I talk about building within the community, single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, ranging from 900 to 1,500 square feet, some with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, rent $900 a month, includes utilities and ground maintenance. Each is compliant with ADA, the American with Disability Act, and is equipped with high-speed broadband to accommodate telehealth. I mean, as I'm reading this, I'm like, I'm always the one who, I'm in my big old house, out in the country. But I'm reading this and I'm like, in another 5 to 7 years, if I make it that, 8.5 years to, through this next big bunch of people dying off, if I make it through the next 8.5 year cycle here, this would look pretty good. Because I could tend to a little garden or a little flower bed and have children around that I could interact with when I felt like it and wasn't being the grumpy old man. And yet I wouldn't have all of this work to take care of this big, huge house that I'm rattling around with all this property. And then I'm free to go and do more things that I want to do that would keep me younger instead of being tied down to this big, huge property. But not only would I would also be giving back, which would make me feel like I was important, because I'm giving back to society. I'm not just sitting here having some nurse come in and take care of me and check on me, and my children having to move close and take care of me or bringing me into their home. I can still feel like I'm a part of a community.
With independence.
And with some independence, right.
And that's the tricky balance.
And folks around to help me that doesn't necessarily then intrude on the lifestyle of my children.
They're available, but you also don't have to see them. And I think that's a key that makes this whole concept quite interesting. So a lot of conversation today about aging, the effects of it, the good news that could be on the way, the good news that's already here, right? Like the spoon's going to be here very soon. The headset for people with macular degeneration already exists.
These communities are being built as we speak.
Yes, those communities are being built as we speak. So a lot of positives as well, especially in light of the status of the world right now and where everything is. A little good news is a good thing. So let us know your thoughts. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Let us know what you think. And Lance, why do we have this conversation today?
Well, because True Chat has a mission, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've had one of these today about the idea of the study of geriatrics and getting older and what can be done to help us. And if you've enjoyed today's show and the general banter back and forth, let your family and your workmates know and tell them they too can find us as a podcast on Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast first thing in the mornings, and we're heard on the weekends across the nation on AM and FM radio stations. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.